Let's make child protection all-inclusive, socially reflective, and adaptive. My name is Isabel Martinez, and this presentation will investigate the educational concern of the universal upholding of all students and children's rights, their protection, and the ethical responsibility of teachers and institutions to ensure their safety and rewarding educational experience. This educational concern indeed indicates that current educational policy must become more adaptive as to protect all students, despite their uniquity. Contemporarily, this applies to the experience of sexually diverse students, whereby policy must ensure equal treatment and protection. I will be exploring this educational and ethical issue in relation to the Department of Education New South Wales Child Protection Policy, responding to and reporting students at risk of harm. This policy states the collective responsibility of government, parent, and community services in the care and protection of children, outlining educational responsibility to support and identify problems amongst young people that put their safety at risk. In maximising the complete protection of children, this policy correlates with various Australian legislation. Two of the major components of this policy include, firstly, outlining the importance of mandatory training and reporting. This ensures that all staff are aware of their mandatory obligation to report and advise about concerns relating to the welfare, safety, and well-being of children within their care. Secondly, this policy outlines the supporting of children and young people. In doing so, it establishes effective systems which encourage and create ease in addressing and reporting upon child protection concerns. It encourages collaborative work in creating swift and effective solutions. And ultimately, it ensures that children and students are made aware of their rights. Overall, this policy aims to create avenues in which child protection is facilitated and enacted, promoting the well-being and safety of students among their educational journeys. Whilst I recognise the efforts of this policy in emphasising ethical professional responsibility in prioritising child protection, I too recognise its various ethical issues. Primarily, this involves a lack of socio-cultural reflectivity and adaptability, ignoring relevant political, educational, and ethical concerns which ultimately prevent the all-inclusive enactment of justice and universal upholding of children's rights. As defined by Newman and Polnitz, ethics is the behaviour of individuals or groups that is thought to be right, fair, good, or just. This should be at the forefront of all educational policy and professionalism, hence the responsibility of ethical professionalism thrust upon educators, whereby all teachers must have a clear foundation for autonomous ethical practice in their responsibility to children, with a strong focus on social justice. Indeed, this is highly relevant to this policy, whereby, as the main protectors of children, teachers should engage in ethical professional practice, prioritising the core values of integrity, respect, cooperation, care, democracy, excellence, responsibility, participation, and fairness. However, we must recognise that ethics is a multifaceted phenomenon, involving the interconnectivity of micro, meso, and macro values and morals. Thus, this is an element which indeed impacts and influences the universal exercising of children's rights and protection. Continuing, lacking in reflexivity and adaptability, I believe this policy fails to adequately acknowledge the contemporary phenomenon of children's diverse sexuality, so prohibiting equitable justice. The prevalence of sexual diversity amongst children is evident in a study conducted of 704 young people between the ages of 14 and 18, of which 43% identified as lesbian and gay, 24% bisexual, 12% pansexual, and 7% genderqueer or transgender. Conclusively then, the prevalence of diverse sexuality amongst children is indeed undeniable. Thus, I conclude that this policy must recognise and educate against the entrenched homophobic Australian sentiment, which impedes equitable justice and child protection. Homophobic ideals and unreflexive educational policy. Homophobia refers to the unreasoning fear or hatred of homosexuals, and it is a sentiment held and shared by 43% of men and 27% of Australian women, of which many are policymakers and/or educators. This is evident in instances of teacher compliance in perpetuation of homophobia and heteronormative discourse. The impact of such attitudes upon the educational experience of sexually diverse individuals is evident by the continued pervasiveness of sexuality-based discrimination, and LGBTQ students often being largely overlooked in educational efforts. 2. 61% of students reported verbal abuse and 18% physical abuse on the basis of homosexuality. The impacts of such abuse and lack of protection and educational intervention is both corrosive and devastating, catalyzing mental and physical health issues for students, such as social anxiety. This is evident by included victim statement. I reported what these guys were doing, but all he said was that I'd done this foolish thing and come out. He could guarantee no protection. Explicit examples of educational discrimination and a lack of protection of sexually diverse students is evident in the avenues homophobic convictions create for independent and religious schools to discriminate against sexually diverse students, preventing governmental protection and intervention. For example, Catholic doctrine renounces homosexuality and on this basis allows Catholic institutions to expel and ostracize sexually diverse individuals. Notably, Australia has afforded more weight to religious freedom than to the equality and protection of the rights of LGBTQ students. Overall, in emphasis and necessity of ethical professionalism, in the light of the contemporary and growing prevalence of sexual diversity, and most importantly, in the obvious inability of educational systems to protect and uphold the rights of all students equally, I strongly believe reforms must be made to the current child protection policy. I believe that in light of current concerns relative to sexual inclusion and exclusion, that this policy should contain a subcategory branch specifically and explicitly outlining the necessary educational measures in maximizing the protection of sexually diverse students. Firstly, I believe this would be achieved through mandatory LGBTQ education for educational providers. Here, I recognize that a lack of explicit training promotes ignorance and discourages education of diverse types of individuals. 2. This will remove, or at least address, the religious and homophobic personal convictions of teachers and educational students, which encourage prejudice and create inequitable protection of children. Secondly, I believe school bullying harassment policies should explicitly include sexual orientation. Indeed, people who experience discrimination require additional support to feel safe and supported in coming forward to assert their rights to equality and non-discrimination. I believe this inclusion will both encourage acceptance and tolerance among students and staff, facilitating safer school environments. This is reiterated by findings from government reports, which see a strong correlation between the positive attitudes of teachers and educational environments to sexual diversity with positive school well-being, school climate, and academic success. 2. Students attending schools with fewer instances of marginalizing behaviors and more consistent adult intervention when those behaviors did occur were happier and more connected at school, safer and more likely to feel as if their teachers were invested in their personal and academic success. Next, I believe that inclusive education should be prioritized amongst this policy. Therefore, this policy should outline systems which aid the process of Catholic and independent schools' treatment of LGBTQ students. This could possibly involve third-party involvement which aims to uphold religious rights to conviction and freedom whilst prioritizing the rights of the student. Next, I believe that the policy should outline that LGBT students are ensured a safe place to seek support and protection among school environments. This could include a specific guidance counselor trained predominantly on issues regarding sexual diversity. Ultimately, in implementing and following the above, this policy would and should outline the necessary requirements of schools to create all-inclusive environments for LGBTQ students. Ultimately, whilst I recognize that the current child protection policy does prioritize the protection of children, I also acknowledge that it must be reformed to explicitly ensure that this applies also to sexually diverse students. In doing so, not only will sexually diverse students feel more included and safe and have their rights upheld, other students will recognize the importance of acceptance and tolerance and be more aware of issues surrounding their socio and cultural environments. Thank you for watching this presentation. please consider the importance of child protection. A reference list has been included at the end of this presentation. Thank you.